Most of what we covered and ended up with last week was talking about the 7th verse, where this King Adonai-Bezek, that he was a cruel king to a large degree, and that he's 70 kings that he had defeated in battle up to this point. Now, this time he's defeated, and he's taken prisoner by the Israelites, but this time he's defeated 70 kings before him. He had cut off their thumbs and their big toes. And we mentioned last week there was a reason for that it's hard to weld a sword when, which was the weapon most of it was used in that day. It's kind of hard to pick up and weld a sword when you ain't got no thumb. You know, if you've got a thumb, you've been trained as a warrior with that, and that's how you were trained. You always had your thumb, and you could weld that sword, and you were right proficient with it. But if that thumb's cut off, that is going to hurt your proficiency immensely, to pretty much to just disable you altogether, practically. And that's what this king did, so they couldn't pick up the sword and use it against him. The big toe, we mentioned he cut off the big toes. Why? That's so you can't run as fast without your big toe, and you can't maintain your balance. And so, and if you can't maintain your balance, you certainly can't, even you got your thumb, you can't, and you can wield a sword, you got to maintain your balance to do that. And so that was the idea mostly behind that. And so what we mentioned last week was spiritually, the enemy will do that to us. If we allow him to have victory, he'll spiritually cut your thumbs off and cut your big toes off, spiritually speaking. And to throw you off balance, because this is our sword. The Word of God is our sword. And so, spiritually speaking, we need our spiritual thumbs to properly use and properly maintain the use of the Word of God in our life, to skillfully use the Word of God and to apply the Word of God in our lives. And we need our spiritual big toes to maintain proper balance. We've got that, one of the problems in the church today, we've got so many people who are out of balance. They go way off over yonder right field or way off over yonder left field, and there's no center field for them anymore. There's no balance. And we've got to have balance when it comes to the Word of God. And so we kind of concentrated, focus on that last week. So I'm going to move on, because we mentioned that's what's wrong with the church in America, is we don't skillfully use the Word of God, and we don't have balance with the Word of God. And we've got to have both of those. We've got to, too many who cannot properly confront and stand against the wiles of the devil, the strategies of the devil we mentioned last week. And so this chapter of Judges, chapter 1, gives us, and I'm not going to read the whole thing for sake of time, but you can read it in your own leisure. But you'll see that through these verses, from verse 7 all the way to verse 21, and even down a few more verses, 27 through the remainder of the chapter. Now, the children of Israel experienced some victories. They were having some victories, but I want you to notice something with me. We read verse 21 that the children of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Drop down to verse 27. And it says, however, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth-shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. All these people fell under the heading of Canaanites. The Canaanites, those who were opposed to God, those who worshiped idol gods, who worshiped false gods, those who lived ungodly, they were determined to dwell in that land. They had dug in. And it didn't matter how many times they got their fanny kicked or anything else, they were going to dig in, and they were determined to dwell in that land. Now, God had given the initiative early on and told them to drive out and even totally destroy, in some cases, some of these heathen tribes, heathen nations. When you don't fully follow the directive of the Lord, you get in trouble. Now, look at verse 28. It came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Canaanites under tribute, but did not completely drive them out. They compromised, in other words. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Jezer. So the Canaanites dwelt in Jezer among them. Nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Naalal. So the Canaanites dwelt among them, and were put under tribute. Nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Alab, Akzib, Helba, Aphik, or Rehob. Now, I don't know if we're pronouncing all those words right or not. You just act like I am. So the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Nor did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anath. But they dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath were put under tribute to them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. And the Amorites were determined to dwell in Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Shelbim. Yet when the strength of the house of Joseph became greater, they were put under tribute. Now the boundary of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akrabim, from Selah and upward. Now, go back to verse 7. I want to pick up still from there, and then we're going to bounce into, because that's the springboard for where we're going.